Hey guys, I'm Nick with Resin Obsession UK, and today I'm going to show you how I make my colourburst coasters. I believe these can also be called petrified rainbow or resin petri dish coasters. Today I'm using art resin. This is a 1:1 ratio resin, so I've emptied equal parts of both part A and part B into my silicone jug. I have sped this portion of the video up by mixing this very slowly. It did take me 5 minutes to do this. However, the slower you mix it, the less bubbles that you will have. If you do find that you get lots of bubbles during mixing, just leave your resin for 5 minutes and all those bubbles will rise to the surface, and then you can just either torch them or pop them with a heat gun. Every now and then I like to scrape the sides of my jug down. This is just to ensure that every single drop of resin is mixed together. If you don't do this, then it can sometimes cause problems curing. I have tried a couple of different resins to create this effect. Art resin is the only resin I've found that pulls the colour into the centre. However, craft resin also works brilliantly, but the colour will spread right to the very edges of your coasters. The coaster moulds I'm using today are from Mr. Resin. They're available both on mrresin.com and Etsy. There'll be a link below in the description. These are my favourite moulds because they're very thick and a lot more durable than the flimsy ones that you can get from Amazon. I've filled these coaster moulds mostly full, allowing just a little tiny bit of room for the alcohol ink. Using a silicone paintbrush, I'm now going to go in and draw any bubbles from the edges of the coasters into the centre. Then once I torch, all the bubbles will disappear and it won't ruin your artwork. If you just pour it, those bubbles that are in the very bottom edge will stay there. The heat will not touch them. Now I'm using a torch to just pop those bubbles. You don't want to hold a naked flame too close to the resin because it will set on fire, but if you hold your torch quite far away, the heat will still pop all the bubbles, or you can use a heat gun. The inks I'm using are Ranger, and they're Cobalt, Boysenberry, Fiesta, Valencia and Mojito, and for white I'm using Jacquard's Blanco Blanco. I'm starting off in this first coaster by just dotting a few colours. I wanted it to have a rainbow effect, but I messed up a little bit on this one and put the purple and the green too far together. All you need to do is pop 1 drop or 2 drops of colour and then a drop of white directly on, and that'll create the sinking effect, so you'll get all these little wisps underneath. Because I'm doing 5 coasters all at once, I'm putting 1 layer in of ink and then letting that react, and then putting another layer of ink on later once it's fully react. In this third coaster I've put the white on first, and you'll see at the end this creates like little white lines, a completely different effect to the other 2 coasters. You don't have to put your white on first. I just find that sometimes this works for me and I wanted each one of these coasters to look slightly different than the next. In these coasters I put 3 layers of ink, so this is a layer of colour, a layer of white, times 3. On the left hand coasters I do put 1 layer of white extra in at the very beginning, just because this gives a slightly different effect to just putting colour and then white. I'm sure you can see that I've actually sprayed some green and purple ink across one of my other coasters that I've not yet started putting alcohol ink in. This doesn't matter because the ink that will be going into it does take effect still, and you can't even see the tiny little smudges at all. I would suggest putting your ink in and then your coloured ink and then your white, letting it do its business, waiting a couple of minutes before you put your next layer. This will make sure that every single little bit of that white reacts and drops down to the bottom, creating that wonderful effect that you can see. If you are doing quite a number of coasters, I would suggest doing a couple at a time, just because your resin might fully set before you get to the last coasters. The thicker the resin, the less the alcohol ink works, which you'll see towards the end. If you look at the purple coaster mould, you can see that the colour is quite up to the edge where the pink and the purple is. As the resin reacts, this will pull in tighter and tighter to the middle, creating that colour burst effect. I do want to have a white background on these so the colour pops a bit more. I'll be doing this using the doming effect later, but if you are using the cake moulds that come in a 3, you can get these from Resin 8. You can actually leave the coasters in, put your white backing on before you demould them. Now for the demoulding, the best part. The best thing about these Mr. Resin moulds is they just pop out. You don't need to do any excessive freeing or anything, they just pop straight out. You can see on this one there's some white striations. That's caused from me putting the white in before the colour, creating a slightly different effect on the left hand 3. The camera doesn't quite do the effects justice at the moment, but at the end I have popped some photos in where you can clearly see all the different striations and the colour dropping to the front of the coaster. My resin in these isn't quite set at the moment. It is touch dry, it's leaving no fingerprints at all, but they are still a little bit bendy. But this is only 24 hours after pouring the resin. I do leave them to sit for another 2 days before I do the next step. I like things to be fully dry, because otherwise you can cause things like rings and scratches in your surface. And as I won't be top coating these, I need them to be as perfect as possible. On the last 2 coasters, these are the ones where I didn't put the white down first, and you can see that there are no extra white striations on these. Now I'm just going to coat the front of the coasters with some liquid latex rubber. This is just to protect that shine so that I don't need to sand them down if any mistakes happen and the white that I'm putting on the back drips onto the front. Again, I'm going to use a silicone paintbrush. You can either just dab a little bit out of the bottom onto the coaster and spread it round. Alternatively to dotting a little bit on, you can just pour a little bit on, which you'll see me do in a moment, and spread it round to the edges. It is a lot quicker, but it can be messy if you pour too much. So I would suggest pouring a small amount at a time, spreading it to your edges, and then if you need a little bit more, you can pour a little bit more on as well. I didn't take this onto the very sides of the coasters, I literally just coated the front. This was because I'm quite confident with my doming technique now, and I know that using a thicker resin, you can get it to dome without it dripping off the sides. Once you've covered every single part of the coaster that you want to protect, you can just set these to one side and let it dry. Alternatively, you can use the heat gun to dry this a lot quicker. The only problem with this is if you put too much heat on, it will affect the structure of your coasters because they won't be fully set at this point. I did leave these to dry overnight, but it only really takes about 20-30 minutes. I'm just trying here just to make sure that I've got every single inch covered. Now, you only need a really thin layer, so try not to put too much on at once, otherwise this will take quite a long time to dry. So for the white layer on the back, I'm going to use Resin 8's Opaque White. If you just mix it up a little bit with your stir stick, scrape off the sides and pop it in your resin to mix it up. You really don't need very much at all, and it does create a really nice thick white resin. For this I'm using Ultracast XT resin because it's a lot thicker than art resin, so it will create that doming effect a lot better than what it would if I used just art resin. Now to create that doming back coat, all you need to do is pour a small amount and spread it out to the edges with your stick, exactly like we did with the latex. Now be very, very careful with the amount that you pour, because if you pour too much it will flow down the sides, and this is more what we call a flood coat than a dome coat. If you do find that you need to add some more, just keep adding a small amount, and I do mean a very, very small amount, only a couple of mils at a time, because you really, really don't want this to drop over the edges. Now, because the colour is really, really intense, you can see on the coaster that I've already done on the left hand side that you can see some of the colour coming through. This doesn't matter for this effect because these coasters are having cork backings put on. However, from the front, that white really, really makes the colour pop. I do leave these coasters to dry overnight, and because it is just a really thin layer, they are fully, completely dry within 24 hours. Now I'm going to take off that latex layer. I'm going to slightly scrape the edge with an art trowel or art palette knife. You don't want to scrape too much because you will scratch the resin, and then once you've lifted an edge up it'll free off really, really easy, and it is very, very satisfying. And these cork backings that I'm going to pop on are just from Amazon. They're self-adhesive and 90mm, so they work perfect with these 100mm coasters. And that's it guys, that's them finished. Now stay tuned for some more resin experiments or resin adventures, and please remember to like, comment and subscribe.